Welcome to RankLens. Today we count down the top 10 most brilliant military deceptions in history. Military history is full of moments where armies didn't win with numbers or firepower alone. They won because the enemy believed a lie. A brilliant deception can shift an entire war in seconds, turning impossible odds into decisive victory. Throughout history, commanders have wielded the most powerful weapon of all, the enemy's own expectations. Today, we're counting down the 10 most brilliant military deceptions that didn't just fool the enemy, they annihilated them. From ancient times to the 20th century, these are the ruses that altered the course of empires. The number one entry might surprise you. At number 10, the Battle of Tannenberg. Sometimes a deception doesn't rely on fake soldiers or dummy tanks. It relies on the enemy simply saying the quiet part out loud. In 1914, as Russian armies pushed into East Prussia, Hindenburg and Ludendorff faced a seemingly impossible situation. They were outnumbered, but the Russians made a fatal mistake. They transmitted their battle orders by radio, completely unencrypted. The Germans intercepted every word, learning exactly where each Russian army would be and when. Hindenburg shifted his forces with surgical precision, concentrating against one Russian army, then pivoting to crush the other separately. In August, the Russian Second Army under Samsonov was surrounded and annihilated, over 12,000 men killed or captured. Samsonov himself fell on his sword rather than face capture. A deception born entirely from the enemy's carelessness. It showed that sometimes you don't need to fake anything, you just need to listen. At number 9, Operation Bertram. In North Africa, Montgomery faced Rommel's Afrika Korps across the desert at El Alamein, and he was determined to keep one of history's most dangerous opponents guessing. The British didn't just prepare a breakthrough in the north, they made Rommel absolutely certain the attack was coming south. Across the desert, the British disguised tanks as trucks and painted trucks to look like tanks. They built a fake pipeline, piece by piece, that wouldn't reach completion, and therefore suggested an attack date weeks later than planned. Rommel was convinced. When Montgomery's real assault crashed down in the north at El Alamein, Rommel was caught flat-footed, his reserves positioned for an attack that was never coming. This wasn't just misdirection, it was mathematical. Every dummy kept German armor away from the real breakthrough, and that margin made the difference. Montgomery broke through, and the turning point in North Africa belonged to the Allies. At number 8, the Inchon Landing. In 1950, North Korean forces were pouring southward, pushing the US and South Korean armies into a shrinking perimeter. Then General MacArthur made a decision that seemed insane. He would land 150 miles behind enemy lines, cut the supply lines, and turn the entire war around in a single stroke. The deception was in the audacity itself. Every sane military analyst knew Inchon was nearly impossible. Tides swung 50 feet, mudflats turned the harbor into a death trap. North Korea believed no general would be mad enough to try it, so they left it lightly defended. MacArthur landed 7,000 troops and immediately cut the North Korean supply lines. The North Korean army, facing a pincer movement, collapsed almost overnight. What had seemed like a doomed retreat became a stunning reversal. Inchon proved that sometimes the best deception is convincing the enemy that you're too brilliant to exist. At number 7, Chancellorsville. Robert E. Lee was outnumbered 2-1 by Union General Hooker, a man who already believed he'd won before the battle started. Lee made a decision that defied every principle of warfare. He split his already outnumbered army, sending Thomas Stonewall Jackson and 12,000 men on a 12-mile march through dense Virginia wilderness to circle around Hooker's right flank. It was insane. If Hooker discovered the movement, he would crush Jackson's column while it was strung out on the road. But Lee's audacity worked. Jackson marched undetected all day. At dusk, he struck the Union 11th Corps with a rebel yell that echoed through the woods. The Union soldiers, caught mid-meal and unprepared, broke and ran. One man's confidence and another man's audacity combined to turn a lost battle into Lee's most perfect victory. But the cost was terrible. Jackson was accidentally shot by his own men that night and would die a week later. At number 6, Austerlitz. Napoleon's Grande Armée was facing the combined armies of Austria and Russia, the Third Coalition, and he was outnumbered. But Napoleon had always been a master of deception, and at Austerlitz he played his greatest bluff. He deliberately weakened his right flank, making it look battered and collapsing. The Austro-Russian commanders saw exactly what Napoleon wanted them to see, an army on the verge of defeat, holding a weak right. They stripped their center, the Pratzen Heights, to send overwhelming force against that weak right flank. It was the trap. The moment they left the heights, French reserves struck like a hammer. The Austro-Russian army was literally split in two, its center shattered. The Third Coalition was annihilated in a single afternoon, a deception so perfect that military academies study it over 2 centuries later. At number 5, Cannae. Hannibal faced a Roman army that outnumbered his forces 2-1. Rome had been at war with Carthage for years, bleeding wealth and soldiers, and they wanted this war finished. So they brought 8,000 men to crush Hannibal's 4,000. Hannibal seemed to be in trouble. His center line was deliberately weak, deliberately positioned to retreat. As the Romans charged forward, they pushed through Hannibal's center, believing they had broken his army. But that retreat was calculated to the inch. As the Roman center pushed deeper, Hannibal's flanking wings, concealed and waiting, swung inward and closed behind them like a noose. Trapped in a pocket of their own making, the Romans were annihilated. Over 5,000 Roman soldiers died in a single afternoon. Cannae stands as history's perfect ambush, studied by every military academy on earth. Hannibal had used the Romans' own confidence as a weapon against them. At number 4, the Yom Kippur War. On October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, when the nation nearly shuts down. It was a calculated political choice, but it was also strategic cover. While Israel was observing a holy day, Egyptian forces positioned themselves for something unprecedented, a full-scale crossing of the Suez Canal against Israeli fortifications. But Egypt had a secret weapon, Tahrir 41. For months, Egypt had been running military exercises called Tahrir 41, constant drills that kept the border tense but routine. Israeli intelligence, watching the same patterns repeat for so long, stopped believing they meant anything. So when real assault forces moved into position on October 6th, they looked exactly like another exercise. Israeli intelligence, under a doctrine called the concept, dismissed the warnings. They believed Egypt wouldn't attack in autumn, wouldn't risk the Americans' wrath, wouldn't cross the canal. Tahrir 41 lulled them into certainty. When the real crossing came, Israel was caught flat-footed. Egypt nearly won the war. At number 3, the Trojan Horse. This is where legend and history blur, but the story has been told for nearly 3,000 years because it represents something primal, the enemy inside the gates. For a decade, the Greeks had laid siege to Troy, and the siege was going nowhere. The Trojans held the city, held the walls, held the advantage. Then, mysteriously, the Greek fleet sailed away. The Trojans, exhausted and victorious, threw open the gates. But left behind on the beach was a gift, a massive wooden horse, an offering to the gods. The Trojans, in triumph, hauled it inside their walls. That night, Greeks emerged from inside the horse's hollow belly, opened the gates from within, and ended the war in blood and fire. The Trojan War lasted 10 years. The deception lasted one night. Whether rooted in fact or pure legend, the Trojan horse became the template for every infiltration and every Trojan attack ever since. At number 2, Operation Mincemeat. In 1943, the Allies were preparing to invade Sicily. and they needed the Axis powers to look anywheres but Sicily. So British intelligence came up with a plan so audacious it seemed like fiction. They would plant false intelligence on a corpse. The body was a homeless man, dressed in the uniform of a Royal Marine officer. British spy master Ewan Montagu wrote letters from the War Office, references to military plans mentioning Greece and Sardinia, all deeply classified, all completely false. They planted these papers on the body and put it in the sea. Currents carried it to Spain, where a Spanish fisherman found it. The Spanish, nominally neutral but Nazi sympathetic, passed the papers to German intelligence. Hitler and his generals read those false plans and believed them. They reinforced Sardinia. They reinforced Greece. They pulled defensive forces away from Sicily. When the Allies landed in Sicily, Axis defenses were undermanned and unprepared. A dead man had changed the course of the Mediterranean campaign. At number 1, Operation Bodyguard and Operation Fortitude. This was the deception that changed the world. In June 1944, the Allies were preparing the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, the assault that would crack open Hitler's European fortress. And the Allies knew that if Hitler moved his reserves fast enough, the invasion could be crushed on the beaches. So they created an army that didn't exist. Operation Fortitude created a fictional First U.S. Army group, complete with fake radio transmissions, fake camps, fake orders, and a fake leader, General George S. Patton, one of the few men Hitler genuinely feared. German spies watched. They photographed training areas. They intercepted radio messages. All of it pointed to an invasion at Pas de Calais, 50 miles north of the real landing beaches. Hitler believed it. He kept 15 Panzer divisions at Calais for weeks after Normandy landed, waiting for the real invasion. Those 15 divisions never arrived to counterattack the real beachhead. By the time Hitler realized the truth, it was too late. Fortitude didn't just deceive the enemy, it rewrote the fate of nations. These 10 deceptions reveal something profound about warfare and human nature itself. The greatest military victories weren't always won by the strongest army. They were won by the commander who understood the enemy's mind. Deception works because it exploits what we expect, what we believe, what we're certain of. From Hannibal's feigned retreat at Cannae to the phantom armies of D-Day, these battles remind us that conviction can be more fragile than steel. The generals who understood this, Lee, Napoleon, Hannibal, Montagu, understood that victory sometimes belongs not to those with the biggest army, but to those willing to think one step beyond the enemy's imagination. And that's the top 10 most brilliant military deceptions in history. If you enjoyed this countdown, subscribe to RankLens for more.